Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and a few weeks ago I published on my channel a video where I talked about postmodernist literature, about a few theories behind what postmodernist literature actually is. I later also released a video about a few postmodernist books, novels and short novels that I think are good introductions into the genre if you have never read it, if you're interested in getting what postmodernism is all about. Many of you like those videos, but many of you also asked me to talk about post-postmodernism, which I mentioned in there, because theoretically speaking, that is what I like to read the most and what I'm going to study if I actually take a PhD in the topic. Now, that is what I am going to do in this video, but be aware that if the other videos seemed a bit confusing and muddy, if they offer no real answer, this one is going to offer even less answers. No one really agrees on what postmodernism actually is, on when it began, when it ended, what it was all about. There are only theories, so let alone, of course, what theoretically follows postmodernism. Also notice that I'm going to talk about post-postmodernism, which has the worst name in the history of human thought, as it relates to literature, to books, which is what I like and study. You find theories of postmodernism related to economics, to architecture, to whatever the fuck, just as with postmodernism. In order to keep it very, very general and to give you a vague idea of what postmodernism is about, I'm going to simplify things absurdly, and I'm going to say that postmodernism was about deconstructing things, was about killing your fathers, to use a metaphor, was about questioning authority, at all this time sacrificing an element of human connection in literature. Post-postmodernism is about rediscovering that human connection, is about re-establishing a relationship with the reader. It's about recognizing that the reader exists and that she or he has some needs when he reads a book. That is what an author like Michael Chabon, which is one of the writers who could be ascribed to this genre movement, says in an essay like Trickster in a Suit of Light, which is in his collection Maps and Legends. If you're interested in contemporary literature, if you like Michael Chabon, do read that book, it's awesome. In Trickster, Michael Chabon says how important it is nowadays to rediscover the value of entertainment. Because of the prejudices of either the academia, high culture, whatever, when we think of entertainment nowadays, we think of something rather bad. If a movie, if a book is entertaining you, it's probably because it's not that good after all. Good books, clever books should not entertain you, they should teach you things. That's of course bullshit. Entertainment is a way of establishing a basic human relationship between a writer and a reader, and when you are getting something from a piece of narrative, you have to be entertained. You can get clever ideas, you can get good discussion points from something you are not liking, from something you're not entertained by, but that is artificial as a process. It's not as spontaneous, as simple as when you get these things from something you also actually like. An author who approaches the same issue from a different perspective is the one author, the one writer who first kind of theorized the emerge of something like post-postmodernism, or at least recognized the need to go beyond what postmodernism had brought. I'm talking about David Foster Wallace. Wallace believed that the techniques of postmodernism, like metafiction, like self-reflexivity, like especially irony, the kind of caustic, deconstructive irony that tears down all institutions but do not offer a solution to the problems of the world, these kind of things had seeped by the late 80s into popular culture, and that nowadays even television, even all forms of popular entertainment use them. David Foster Wallace recognized the importance of postmodernism back in the day, but he thought that the time had come for something new. The time had come to re-establish, to forget about this caustic irony and to re-establish a real connection with readers. He believed that future, experimental, future brave writers will have to risk being called too romantic, too emotional, too cheesy maybe, because they will have to rediscover basic things like, writing books people would like to read, or writing books that caused emotions in people. He talks about this stuff in an essay called E Unibus Pluram, which is a quintessential read if you're interested in this whole topic issue thing. But many different writers will try to achieve this in different ways, writers more or less inspired by Wallace himself. One example is Dave Eggers, for instance, who in his books insists on how he opens himself up to the reader, how he is offering parts of his inside, parts of his personality to the reader in a process that is very deep and establishes a deep connection between the two. Eggers' books, like the heartbreaking work of Staggering Genius, looks a bit weird at times. I don't know you notice it, but if you have read it, you know how quirky this is. It might look postmodern to an untrained eye, but at the same time, all the gimmicky bits in here do not serve the same purpose of postmodern gimmicky bits. There, the author wanted to make you realize, to make you remember that you were reading fiction, that what you were reading wasn't true, just as what you were listening in the news, for instance, every day. Here, the author is kinda eviscerating his own work to let you know how he is behind it, a human being is behind it, has constructed it in order to establish a connection and to talk with you, the reader, in order to make you feel things and make you reflect about the world. An author who uses this same approach in a yet different way is, for instance, Jonathan Franzen. Jonathan Franzen is clearly influenced by postmodernists and by late 20th century authors in his books, but he also is heavily influenced by classic family sagas, like 19th century's family sagas. And his books are so popular, I think, also because they rediscover some rather addictive narrative techniques that were like part of the classics and then postmodernists shunned as if it was just too low. Those techniques, those narrative techniques, were too low to be used by high literature. That is why Franzen is sometimes criticized. Here in Italy, he is sometimes criticized because people say that he is not inventing anything new, that he is doing the same things that European writers did 2 centuries ago. Like if that was anything wrong, whatever. Another author who does the same thing but better is, for instance, Jeffrey Eugenides. Eugenides started writing books like The Virgin Suicidals, rather weird, rather like quirky books, not really, rather almost creepy, but then ended up writing books like Middlesex and even most importantly The Marriage Plot, which are straight up novels that like read really like classic literature, meaning in the way they are offered, in the way the narrative is presented, in the enjoyment you get at the end of the book. Eugenides himself said in an interview that he, like the writers of his generation, these writers that started publishing in the late 80s and 90s, he was following in the footsteps of postmodernists who were rebelling against classic literature, but he and the other writers themselves didn't really know what they were rebelling against. So when they found out, they realized that some of that stuff, some of that classic literature, was actually worth preserving after all. Finally, another crucial part of post-postmodern literature, one that fascinates me quite a lot and what I'd like to study about it, is the way this current handles popular culture. Pop culture references were a quintessential part of postmodernism. In books like Pynchon's or Delillo's, you had all these references to popular TV and cinema, for instance. But there, all these references were used alongside highbrow references to the classics, to Bible studies, and they were used from a highbrow perspective. The authors weren't necessarily snobs, but they used these references in a way that let you know that they understood the difference between these two like narrative means, these different classes of narrative. In post-postmodern literature, in authors like Jonathan Lethem, Michael Chabon, Junot Diaz, the pop references are used by people who are actual true fans of this stuff, by people who recognize the importance and the value of these popular narrative forms, people who recognize that like discussing the value of these things is meaningless because they are all tools we use to shape our world. This is true, for instance, in a book like The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, in which like genre novels like The Lord of the Rings, genre films like Star Wars are used by the characters to navigate the world, to make sense of their world. It's true in a book like Michael Chabon, The Amazing Adventure of Cavalier and Clay, in which escapist fiction like comic books, it's not just there to like make you forget about your daily troubles, it's there to help you cope with historical, personal traumas. That I find really fascinating. I am going to stop here because if I talk more about this topic, I'm only going to make it muddier and muddier. and it's better if I stop here. I'm going to link a few essays, academic essays, crucial ones on this issue, on the topic. Some of these scholars call the movement post-postmodernism, some don't, whatever. I'm not sure all the essays I'm going to link are open, like available to anyone. If they are, I'm going to put some kind of link. Let me end with one final reflection, because I understand that as I presented this whole issue, it might look like really the postmodernists were these assholes who didn't care about anything, who just wanted to criticize everything and let everything burn, whereas the postmodernists are these cool guys who want to establish sincere relationships with people and want to open up a good discussion to change the world into a better place. Except that, no, of course. One thing that it's worth noticing is that yes, postmodernism, for instance, didn't offer solutions to the problems of the world. It criticized a lot, it didn't offer alternatives, maybe, not always, but at the same time it was a very political movement. It was extremely political. Like people like Thomas Pynchon in his novels, of course, always criticize the way Americans handled foreign policy, the way the industry worked, the way the weapon corporations handled the world and wars. It was always political, even when he was talking about like really silly and meaningless stuff, apparently. Authors like David Foster Wallace, Dave Eggers, even when they are apparently talking about foreign politics in a way, because they want to open up themselves so much to the reader, are always kinda talking about themselves, are always kinda focusing on their own small problems, on the problems of the people they are like, we might say. That's it. Let me know what you think about this issue, what your thoughts on the topic are. Do you think that there is a thing as postmodern literature? If you have read some of these authors, some of these works, did you notice any difference with, with previous currents? Because you see, I mainly talked about the author's ideas or their aims, but I talked very little about what you find in actual books. That's one of the reasons why I myself am not completely sold to the idea that postmodernist literature even exists. I'm really open as far as this whole topic goes. Thank you so much for watching once again, guys. Let me know whatever you think in the comments down below. I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.